Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Prime-Booley. I am the Training Instruction Manager with the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, otherwise known as CETL. CETL is proud to present the latest round in our Faculty Learning Opportunity Series, Grants 101, Tips and Tricks for Writing a Compelling Project Narrative, Teaching Innovation Fund. We're also pleased to introduce Sean Terrell, the Associate Vice President of Research Planning and Grants. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, we are recording today's session. Be able to provide for those who cannot join us today. It'll go on the CETL website. More information can be found there. And then secondly, any questions throughout today's presentation? Sean informed me pretty informal, so raise your hand, interrupt, or you can throw it in the chat if you want to be more discreet. But we'll make sure we'll address any and all questions. I think with all those out of the way, I'll hand it over to Sean.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. Good to be with you, whether you are watching this live or viewing the recording. This is Grants 101, Tips and Tricks for Writing a Compelling Project Narrative. We are going to be talking a lot about grants, mostly on the public side, so that would be federal and state grant funding. But it was important as we delve into grants and we talk about how to write a grant narrative that we apply some of our learning to an actual grant. And the great thing about the Teaching and Innovation Fund, and if you're not familiar with the Teaching and Innovation Fund, it is sponsored by the Reynolds Community College Foundation. The initiative was designed to seed fund test ideas for faculty to improve student outcomes through the equity lens. It is a fairly simple application, but if you've never written a grant or you've never applied for a grant, it can seem a little bit overwhelming. And so while this provides great context to some of the learning outcomes of this session, hopefully will help you, inspire you, whatever, give you some good confidence to submit an application to this fund, because it typically has not been very competitive. And we are trying to increase opportunities for faculty to seek some funding for their classrooms. So today we're going to talk about a little bit of everything. I'm going to talk to you about the Reynolds Grant Department and how we support grant writing and fundraising at the college. We're going to talk about federal and state grants. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about federal grants. Really basic 30,000-foot view, high-level overview of grants. And then, like I said, we're going to apply some of these, some of the things that I'm talking about, some of these tools to help faculty prepare to submit an application to the Teaching Innovation Fund. I know I have an hour and a half. I will not go nearly that long, say 45 minutes. This is going to be a little bit of drinking from a fire hose. And so, like I said, I hope it's helpful. This recording will be available. I'm going to share a lot of documents that are going to be available to you. But as always, if you ever need anything regarding grants, my door is always open. So I wanted to start with this slide, which is our sort of visual for our current strategic direction. It's a new day, Reynolds 2021, through 2024 strategic direction. And I wanted to start here because it really is essential in any type of fundraising activity that you're thinking about doing, that whatever you're trying to get funded is directly tied to the college's strategic plan. This is often a requirement of the funders that we work with. And as we put together compelling narratives for projects that we want to fund, we often tie the activities that we're proposing in that narrative to the college's strategic direction. Why? It shows that we're laser focused on our work. It shows the funder, the grantor, the entity that's granting money out, that we really are serious about the activities that we're proposing and that the author has the support of the institution. So often, funders will receive applications that really do not communicate how the institution supports the project. And if the institution doesn't support the project, then the funder isn't going to support the project. So we talk about the strategic direction a lot here at Reynolds. previous to my working at Reynolds, I worked at another institution. We also had a strategic direction, and that strategic direction looked great sitting in a drawer, never to be seen or heard from again. The one thing that one of the things that I appreciate a lot about Reynolds Community College, but one of the things that's always impressed me is how we always go back to our strategic direction. I have an idea, how does it align with the strategic direction? That's important. So whenever you're working on a grant or thinking about a grant, make sure you're thinking in terms of our strategic direction. So what are grants and why grants? Really simple. Grants are an opportunity for seed funding, to seed new ideas, new programs. Grants are great for research, scholarships for students, capacity building, technical assistance. Grants are even now really getting into student supports. We see a lot of grants that have a student support requirement. And of course, I'm talking about grants that are specific to higher education and institutions of higher education and post-secondary institutions, both of the 2-year and the 4-year. So, a variety of grants are available to higher education institutions. We say it all the time. There's a lot of money out there. There is a lot of money out there. And a singular grants office can't possibly go after every dollar. And so that's why these sessions are important. I'm really happy to report that over the past, we'll say 6 months, but really a year, more and more faculty have been coming to me expressing an interest in learning more about grants and how they can be involved in fundraising for the college. That's great. It's going to take all of us helping to support a culture of grant making here to actually do what we have the potential of doing. So let's talk a little bit about the Reynolds Grants Department. When I was hired in October of 2022, I was hired to be the Director of Grants Management. I worked in the Office of Advancement, and the whole idea of the Director of Grants Management, the whole purpose for that role was to focus on public fundraising. Working very closely with the Reynolds Educational Foundation, who was doing a lot of private fundraising to maximize those dollars with public fundraising, and specifically federal and state grants. Anecdotally, my goal is to raise every year a percentage of our operating budget in new public funding. Reynolds has a gift in the foundation in that, again, the institution that I came from, not every institution has a, I'll say aggressive, but really it's a very intentional foundation that does a lot of public fundraising. Sorry, a lot of private fundraising. Those private dollars can be leveraged for public dollars. And when we get into ROI here in a minute, we talk about what funders are looking for. Leveraged dollars are a big piece of that. And so we're very fortunate to have a foundation that does great work on the private side. Last year, we raised a little bit north of $2 million in new public dollars. This year, in the first 6 months of our fiscal year, we raised nearly $3.5 million in new public dollars. And we're currently managing almost an $8 million public grant portfolio. So we are getting there. It is a work in progress. I think the thing that I'm the most proud of, though, is, again, seeing more faculty and staff involvement in grant making. That really is the ultimate goal. Together, we can do great things. The Department of One can only do so much. So how else do we support the institution? We identify grant opportunities that align with the strategic priorities of the institution, as well as the priorities of individual schools and departments, and those things should be linked. There's a lot of places to go on the internet to help to find new grant opportunities. We help with that. It can almost seem overwhelming. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we find new grants here in a minute. We work with project stakeholders, and by project stakeholders, I mean internal stakeholders, faculty, staff at the college, as well as external stakeholders, to build projects that meet the priorities of a grant initiative. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means. What are priorities of a grant initiative? Or more importantly, what are the priorities of the grantor? We serve as grant writers for the college. There are, there's a place for all of us as we develop a project, as we write a grant and submit that grant. But the grants office really has a lot of experience writing grants. We have a lot of experience with specific agencies that we're writing grants for. We understand the mechanics of grants. We work closely with our business office to make sure we're putting together budgets and managing our budgets well. But we still need subject matter experts to weigh in on the grant writing because we don't know everything there is to know, especially when we're talking about programmatic grants. Like for instance, one of our big programmatic grant-funded priorities right now is biotechnology. I know very little about the biotechnology. I can tell you how a grant proposal to the Department of Ed should be organized. I can tell you how activities should be linked to budget lines, should be tied to the strategic direction. But when it comes to the components of a post-secondary biotechnology academic program, I lean on our bioscience faculty to really help me write those aspects of the proposal. So we serve as primary grant writers, but we certainly need the help of our faculty and staff. And then we support project implementation, reporting, and grant closeout if an award notification is issued. And by the way, I'll just say, in summer of 23, we merged some different departments and offices to create the Department of Research Planning and Grants. Research being our IR department, planning being our strategic planning work, and then grants, which is what we're talking about today. On the grants administration side, some other ways that research planning and grants or the grants office supports the college. We ensure the institution remains in compliance with federal registration guidelines, federal spending, and grant oversight. This is an enormous beast. There's a lot of federal oversight, as you would expect. Federal dollars are taxpayer dollars, as are state dollars. And so we really make sure that we remain in compliance with regard to the grant portfolio that we manage. We ensure all reporting is submitted according to the implementation guidelines of a grant cycle. We're going to talk about the grant cycle here in a minute, but all grants require some form of reporting. Sometimes it's quarterly reports, sometimes it's semi-annual reports, sometimes it's annual reports, but there is some type of reporting that's involved. That reporting usually has two broad components. There's the programmatic side. So are you implementing the activities that you said you were going to implement? And then as those activities are implemented, are you seeing the metrics that you anticipated? That's one category of reporting. The other category is the financial aspects. Are you spending money as you said you would spend money? Are you drawing down according to your timeline? Are you staying within those federal and state regulatory requirements with regard to how we're spending that money? So we work to ensure that is happening at the institutional level. We ensure all reporting is submitted according to the implementation guidelines of the grant cycle. We just talked about that. We ensure spending and grant drawdown is occurring within the appropriate time frame. This is a big piece. It's actually harder to spend money than you might think. Everybody has an idea of funding that they need for the new project, but once it's awarded and activities start to be implemented, there's all kinds of things that can happen to slow down drawdown, especially now, right? So if you're ordering equipment, maybe your equipment is on back order, or supply chain has slowed the delivery of equipment. That means you can't draw those funds down as quick. There's a lot of, maybe you've got personnel and you have to do some new hires and it takes longer than you anticipated to hire your project director, your grant-funded project director. So there's lots of things that can happen with regard to drawdown of grant funds. And so we help make sure that's moving along. And if it's not, we report back to the funder that it's not happening and why it's not happening. And generally, funders are very flexible as long as you communicate. And then, like I said, we support the efforts of the advancement team to maximize public and private investments. So that's a little bit about the grants department and how we support the institution. Let's talk a little bit deeper about grants. So there are two broad types of grants. There's private, which is managed by the foundation. Private grants typically come through corporate donors or individual donors. Then there's the public grant side. Our public grants are managed by research planning and grants. And there's two broad types of public grants. There's federal grant dollars and state grant dollars. Both are funded through taxpayer dollars. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about federal grants today because in general, there are two entities that we receive state grant dollars through. That's the VCCS and SHEV. VCCS and SHEV state dollars are typically non-competitive dollars. Not always, but they're typically non-competitive dollars. So what does that mean? That means that there is a certain amount of taxpayer dollars that's appropriated in the state budget for an initiative. Maybe it's a workforce development initiative. Maybe the state legislators appropriated $7 million for workforce development programming in the state of Virginia. They take that $7 million and they distribute it equally among the 23 community colleges. Actually, they don't distribute it equally. They have an equation to equitably distribute the funds. It might be based on enrollment. It might be based on geolocation. It might be based on number of programs. But whatever that algorithm looks like, they've appropriated specific dollars for every institution. Then we submit an application that talks about what we're going to do with our piece of that pie, a budget that talks about how we're going to spend that money, and we typically get those state dollars. Now, that's not always the case, but the vast majority of state grant dollars that we bring in are non-competitive. Federal dollars are entirely different. These are highly competitive federal dollars. They're usually large initiatives, large being that the total amount of funds that have been appropriated for a specific initiative are in the multiple millions. There's a nationwide competition to access those grant dollars. We submit an application. That application is scored by non-federal reviewers. Applications are federal grant applications, generally scored by individuals who do not work for the funder or the grantor. And then the highest scores win. Those are three broad types of grants. Let's talk about what grants are. Grants are seed funding for new projects and programs. Grants are philanthropy. By philanthropy, I mean the opportunities for state and federal entities, our public government system, to invest in interventions that positively impact communities and grow economies. So this is philanthropy opportunities for state and federal government. Grants are not free money. This is really important because I think consciously, subconsciously, we tend to think of grants as free money. They're not. They're investments. Just like you have a Roth IRA, 401k, or maybe you've got a mutual fund that's managed by a money manager, you are investing your hard-earned dollars into whatever that financial instrument is. You expect a return on those dollars, some kind of a return. Equally, the government expects a return on their investment as well. Generally, a return on investment, public grant, are metrics. Individuals served, jobs created, jobs retained, individuals trained. These are metrics that those entities can then go back to the legislature, or legislators, and lobby for more funding in future budget cycles. So really important to understand that these are investments and that there is a return on that investment that's expected by the grantor. Some entities that we often correspond with regard to federal grants, and these are really specific to post-secondary institutions. There's a ton of agencies, federal agencies out there that offer grant initiatives or invest in projects to create community impact. But the ones we talk to, the ones we deal with the most are here on the screen. U.S. Department of Education is obviously a grantor that we work with quite often. In October, we received a $2.25 million Title III grant through the U.S. Department of Education. So that's one example. Economic Development Administration typically has been an infrastructure federal granting agency, but they're really getting into now more business development, ecosystem development, workforce development, everything that goes into sector development both at the local, state, and federal level. We just submitted an application, a workforce development application that was one component of a 6-component project called Tech Hubs. That was the Economic Development Administration. So we work quite often with that, EDA for short. Department of Labor is another one we work with quite often, U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA. The National Science Foundation is a big federal granting agency that we work with quite often. We are trying to develop a relationship with them. It's a great agency to work with because they're a convening agency, which means once you're at the table, once you get a little bit of grant dollars through them, they like to continue to fund successful projects that they've funded in the past. They like to convene their grantees so that grantees meet other grantees and they can scale projects. And they are really, really interested in creating more projects specific to two-year community colleges. National Institute of Health, or NIH, National Endowment for Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation. These are just some federal agencies that offer grants that might be of interest to you. So how do you find a grant? Well, looking for grants online can be overwhelming. Sometimes it seems like there's a black hole of opportunities out there. And so it's tough to really center your focus on where you can find the most bang for your buck. And by buck, I mean your time, the most precious of all investments. The quick way is to ask us. Ask the grants department. We have our finger on the pulse. So we're looking at this stuff every single day. We swim in this pool every day. We have a grant opportunity matrix that I'm going to show you in a minute, but first I want to show you grants.gov. I want to talk a little bit about grants.gov, and we are going to share this PowerPoint, and there are hyperlinks in this PowerPoint just to make it easier for you. Grants.gov is sort of the go-to for finding federal grants. You can search federal grants on this website. You can apply for federal grants on this website. I'm going to show you the search feature real quick. So if at the top, if I hit search for grants, you can search for grants without actually logging into the grants.gov portal. Reynolds has a login for grants.gov. This is how we would submit a grant. But you can search for grants without logging into the system. And you can see here, I mean, there's 66,000 archived grants. There's 500 grants that are forecasted, 2,445 that are currently posted. I mean, trying to find, that's a needle in a haystack, trying to find an initiative. But there are some ways that you can filter in this search to make it a little bit easier. So let's say you just want to look at all Department of Education grants. Let's say you only want to look at the ones that are posted. You don't want to see the forecast. Forecasted being they're not posted yet, but they've made an announcement that they will be posting soon. So I can go down here and select all Department of Education, and then I'll just see Department of Education over here on the right side. And then I can go through here and read the titles of the grants, when it was posted, and most importantly, and I'm going to move this here for a second, most importantly, when it closes. That's when the application is due. Those are two really important things to look at before you even look at a solicitation or click on the opportunity title, the opportunity map. Because if you see that, for instance, if I got in here today and I see that the closing date is 3/6 tomorrow, don't even open it. Right? You really need to think about, and I'm going to talk about proactive grant making here in a minute, but a lot can be gleaned just from looking at this page. If you scroll down here at the bottom, I think this list is exhaustive. Yeah, this list is exhaustive. So this is all the posted ed grants. So it's not bad. It's only one page. Some of these are for elementary and second education. That's not to say we wouldn't be interested in taking a look at those, but I might not start my Department of Ed search there. I would be looking for more post-secondary education. FIPSI is a good one to look for. Let me see if I can find one. There should be one. Here's one, Office of Post-Secondary Education, International Foreign Language Education, Fulbright Hayes Faculty Research Abroad. So maybe you're a faculty member, you've been thinking about doing some research abroad, you might want to check that one out. I would go over here and I would say, oh, it was posted on 2/23, so it was just recently posted, and it closes April 23rd. I've got some time, let's take a look at that. You can click on the opportunity number, and this takes you to all kinds of information about the grant. go through this just a little bit. So some other things you want to look out for as you navigate grants.gov and specific initiatives. So again, original closing date, April 23rd. That's a big one. You've got to give yourself, I mean, for a federal grant, 2 months, easy, 2 months. I would say you might, if you have a project that's already been developed, it's fleshed out, like for instance, when we submitted our Title III grant, it was all based on the work we've been doing with Achieving the Dream. That work had been going on for a year, 2 years. So that project had already been well developed, and we wrote that grant in about 2 weeks. But again, it was because we've been developing that project. If you have not even started project development, and ideally you want to be looking for grants that you already sort of thought about a project, you might have even done some preliminary development. Maybe you've got a project wall, you've got a project that's fairly well fleshed out, you might even have a preliminary budget, and you're just waiting to find that perfect opportunity to pluck that project down and align and match it up with the funding opportunity. So you want to look at the closing date. Estimated total program funding is $750,000 for this particular initiative. That's not $750,000 per application or per project. That's total. So anybody, any institution in the United States that wants to apply for this grant is going to be competing for $750,000. Typically, they'll have an award ceiling, which is the maximum amount that you can ask for, that an applicant can ask for, and an award floor, which is the lowest amount you can ask for. So the lowest amount of that $750,000 that you can ask for would be the floor. The highest amount of that $750,000 you can ask for would be the ceiling. The next thing you want to take a look at, eligible applicants. If public and state-controlled institutions of higher education are not listed under eligible applicants, you probably don't want to read any further. Now, maybe you are thinking about bringing in external partners to partner on a grant and perhaps even lead that grant. Well, you might have a little bit more flexibility if one of the partners you're thinking about is an eligible applicant. But in post-secondary world, most of us are looking for grants that we are allowed to apply for, that we are eligible applicants for, and we being public and state-controlled institutions of higher education. Also here, private institutions of higher education. And then they've got some information about, some additional information on eligibility. You would want to read that. And then here's the description, and this really talks about what the general idea of the initiative is, what they're looking to fund. But it's not going to tell you all the information. To get all the information, you really need to go up to package. There's no opportunity package here. You might find it in this related document. So if you click on related document and then you open up this full announcement, it'll take you to, it'll either take you to the solicitation or it will take you to the Federal Register, which will give you a lot more information about what's expected in the application. I would love to open this up and take you through it and talk about how to write a compelling narrative for this. But the reality is that these federal solicitations they're very complex. So again, instead of doing that, we're going to go to the Teaching Innovation Fund. It's the same principle, same tips, same ideas, but just in a applied to 3 questions as opposed to a 50-page narrative. Okay, maybe we can do that in future Grants 101 sessions. But anyway, that's a little bit of a tour of grants.gov. I'm going to go back here to my PowerPoint. The grant opportunity matrix. So I want to show you the grant opportunity matrix. This is even easier. So grants.gov might have seemed overwhelming. This hopefully will look a bit easier. So this is the grant opportunity matrix. This is a spreadsheet that we release once a month, or that is released once a month. And it's a listing of all the federal grants. Federal grants released by grantors, by funders, that really are applicable to us as post-secondary institutions of higher education. So if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see different tabs. I'm going to click on the U.S. Department of Ed grants. Here's the same list of grants we just looked at. only in a much easier to digest spreadsheet. And so again, I would look through this list. I would look for anything that's from the Office of Post-Secondary Ed first. Again, it's not a must, but that's the low-hanging fruit. Let's look at this. Office of Post-Secondary Education, Federal TRIO programs, training program for Federal TRIO programs, and then it's got the assistance listing number. So again, just to reiterate what I said, I'm going to look at this. It's Office of Post-Secondary Ed, so chances are I'm going to be an eligible applicant. It's been posted. It was posted on February the 16th, and it's due April the 16th. Now, if I want to read more about this, all I have to do is go over here and click on the opportunity number, and it'll take me right to that portal in grants.gov. And then I can do the same thing that we just did for the Fulbright A scholarship. It's due April 16th. Estimated total program funding is $4,377,576. That's program-wide, so that's institutions are all going to be vying for that, those $4 million, $4.3 million. The maximum amount as an applicant that I can ask for is $402,000. And then I'll go down here and make sure that I'm an eligible applicant, and I'll read more about it. And then if I want to get even more information, I'll go up here to the package, and here they have the package number, and I'll preview that, and it'll give me even more information. Ultimately, I want to download the solicitation, and that'll tell me everything I need to know. Now, the trick about this, the federal grant solicitations, these are 100-page documents that really get into a lot of federal legalese. They're pertinent, they're important, but they're tough to navigate for people who don't, again, swim in those waters every day. So at this point, if I'm a faculty member or a staff member and I've identified this grant opportunity, I've looked at the closing date, I have acknowledged that I'm an eligible applicant, I've read enough of the description to know I'm interested in pursuing. My next step would be to contact the grants office and have a conversation with us, and we can help distill down that solicitation for you. There are key components of that solicitation we're going to talk about here in a minute, but again, we're going to apply those key takeaways, things you need to look out for in the solicitation, to a 3-question solicitation, as opposed to a solicitation like this, which is really a very complex solicitation. So how do you access the federal grants matrix? Email your grants office. We will be glad to send this to you. We share this with deans. Not every month, but we do share it with deans. But if this is something you want to take a close look at, again, you can send me an email. I can get on a schedule of sending this to you once a month, because these do change. They don't change drastically month to month. But when we're talking about proactive grant making here, the sooner we hear about an initiative, the sooner we can start writing that application, as opposed to finding out that the grant initiative's been released. It was released 2 months ago, and I've got 2 weeks to deadline. That's not conducive to submitting a compelling case. So those are the 2 basic ways that you can find out about grants. You can search for grants. I'm going to fast forward back to our screen here, our last slide. How do I apply for a federal grant? Well, the answer to that is easy. You have to work through the grants office, and there's a number of reasons why. Okay, first of all federal grants have to be submitted through some kind of a federal portal. Most federal grants are still submitted through grants.gov. Some agencies use their own grants portal. NSF, the National Science Foundation, uses its own grants portal. It's called Fastlane or research.gov. EDA has its own grant portal. If you've ever worked with the Appalachian Regional Commission, they have their own grant portal. But the vast majority of grants are still submitted through grants.gov. You have to have login credentials for grants.gov. You have to be an authorized representative of the institution to even set up a workplace. You have to have institutional information like the UEI, which is our unique entity identifier. This is a code that the federal government uses to identify us as a grantor, us as a state institution that does business with the federal government. That information is held in the grants office. You have to have our EIN. You have to have our CAGE code. You have to have all of this information that, again, is what the federal government uses to identify us. The only way you're going to get access to that information is by working through the grants office. The great thing about all of these portals is that there is a way for us to link you, say you're a faculty member or a staff member who's really helping to develop this grant proposal, we can link you to that portal once we're in it and we've created the portal for the specific grant initiative. But it's something that you can't start on your own. There's just, that's a requirement of the grantor. So if you want to work on a grant, if you have a grant idea, if you need help finding a grant, if you found a grant and you want to explore that grant, then contact the grants office and we will work with you. So now I want to talk a little bit about what a grant is, and we're going to focus on the grant life cycle. The grant life cycle is a linear life cycle. It includes creating the funding opportunity, or for us, finding the funding opportunity, applying for that opportunity, the award decision, implementing that project that's being awarded, and then closing that grant out, closing that project out. There are 3 phases to the award life cycle, or to the grant life cycle. There's the pre-award phase. The pre-award phase is where projects are developed. It's where we identify a funding opportunity that aligns with our project or the goals of our project. And it's where we write and submit the grant narrative and budget. We're going to spend all of our time moving forward on that phase. And we can talk about potentially doing some future sessions on the other 2 things. But just for context, the second phase of the grant life cycle is the award decision and notification. This is where we either get notification that our proposal has been awarded, our project's been awarded funding, our proposal was scored high enough to get those grant funds, to be awarded those grant funds. Or we find out our application didn't score high enough. I want to talk about that for a second. If your proposal is not selected for an award, and keep in mind, these are limited federal dollars that institutions across the country are competing for. These are highly competitive grants. In most grant cycles, even in the multi-million-dollar, even for grants that have appropriations in the multiple millions of dollars, there typically will only be 5 to 10 projects awarded. And there will be hundreds of projects that apply for that funding. It's still important, despite the competitive landscape, that we submit applications. We want to make sure that they're compelling applications. We want to make sure our projects align with the focus of the funder, because every funder have specific projects that they're looking to fund. So we want to make sure we've done our homework and we're aligning our project not only to our strategic plan, our strategic direction, but the strategic direction of the funder we're applying to. We want to make sure our budget aligns with the activities we're proposing. We want to make sure our math is right. There's a lot there to make sure it is right. If we do all of that and we submit a compelling narrative, then ultimately it really boils down to whether or not we scored higher than the other applicants. If we don't, the beauty of the funding cycle is that we will get the reviewers' notes back and the scores back. And that gives us an opportunity to go back, strengthen our proposal, and resubmit when that initiative comes back around. And most federal grant initiatives come back around. They're not a one and done. Of course, it all depends on federal appropriations and the federal budget. But the vast majority of federal awards that we go for are offered, if they're not offered every year, they're offered every other year. So if we're not selected for funding, we take those reviewer notes, we look at our proposal, and we go through and we strengthen our proposal based on the scoring that the reviewers gave us and their notes. All that is to say, it's really easy to get a no for the first time and the wind gets let out of the sails. It's really more important that you use that as a learning opportunity to strengthen a proposal for another resubmit, because pulling together a grant-funded project, submitting a 50-page grant narrative with corresponding attachments, letters of support, letters of commitment, and a budget is a massive undertaking. And so we don't want to waste that time. And again, if it aligns with the strategic direction, it's important to the institution, it's important to your program, it's important to your department. So we want to make sure we're continuing to follow up on it. In the event that the award decision comes back a positive and we get the dollars, then we go into post-award phase. and that's the implementation of the activities that we proposed in our project narrative, making sure we're doing the reporting, and then closing that grant out. So again, we're going to talk a lot about the pre-award phase, and I just went over what that is. Some basic tips for successful grant writing, and then we're going to move into the Teaching Innovation Fund, and we're going to apply some of these tips. Successful grant writing is the ability to respond to prompts presented in the solicitation. So if you think back to the grants.gov page I showed you, we found an opportunity number. We looked at the basic information on the opening portal page there, where we looked at the award ceiling, the due date, eligible applicant. We saw a little bit of a description. Then we went up and we downloaded the package. And that package is the solicitation. This is the full announcement. This is everything you need to know about that initiative, including how your proposal, how your narrative should be organized, all of the questions that they want you to respond to, what your budget should be comprised of, what is allowable, what is not allowable, even what they're looking for with regard to how you're going to spend those dollars. And then there's a lot of federal legalese that's also included in the solicitation. Where most people get tripped up in the grant writing process is not responding to the prompts or the questions in the solicitation. That reviewer, once that grant is submitted and the reviewer is scoring that proposal, they're going to have the solicitation on one side and the proposal on the other side. And they're going to go step by step through every prompt. Did the grant writer, did the applicant respond effectively to every question we asked in the solicitation? And you're going to be scored on that. And it's not surprising. It happens to all of us, even seasoned grant writers. As we read through a solicitation and then we start writing about this project, we tend to forget the specifics of the solicitation, or we try to mold that solicitation into our grant project or how we're writing or communicating the grant project. In essence, we take creative license when it comes to those prompts in the solicitation. And that's the first place where people get tripped up. So if there's nothing else that you get from this presentation, if you are applying for a grant, thinking of applying for a grant where you're a faculty member who wants to submit a Teaching Innovation Fund application, there's nothing you take away. It's that you must respond to every prompt in that solicitation. You must answer every question. Some other tips. Know the funder and their requirements. Not only knowing the funder and their requirements, but knowing the funder and their priorities, their strategic direction. If you are applying to a funder and they specifically say we're looking for projects that are focused on non-credit workforce development credential programs in post-secondary ed, and you write a proposal solely focused on maybe increasing the capacity of a transferable 4-credit program, you're ignoring the grantor's strategic priority with that initiative. So you must look at what the funder is wanting to fund in the initiative, in the solicitation, and you must write to that. Don't propose a project that goes outside of the funder's scope. Respond to the RFP thoroughly and concisely. That's really where I'm talking about making sure you're responding to all the prompts in the solicitation. Align the project narrative to the budget narrative. There's so many times where we talk about activities we want to implement in a project narrative, and we don't ask for funding for those activities. Or we don't ask, there's not a budget line that aligns with each one of those activities. Most grant reviewers will start with the budget because it's sort of the overview. What are they asking money for? And then they'll go to the narrative and say, okay, does it align with what they've proposed in the budget? If it doesn't, it's not going to be a compelling grant application. So you really need to make sure as you're putting together your budget, and a lot of grant writers will just start with the budget. Faculty member will come forward and say, I've got an idea for a project. Great. What do you want to buy? What do you need to spend money on? You start there, and then you work your way back into the activities you're going to implement, what your anticipated outcomes from the implementation of those activities are, and then we talk about metrics. All right, so let's jump into the Teaching Innovation Fund, because I think that's why, at least if you're a faculty member, you're here. So I'm going to, before I get into this, I'm going to pull up the solicitation for Teaching and Innovation Fund. So this is the solicitation for the Teaching and Innovation Fund. And again, this is a good way for us to apply some of the things I just talked about, because this is a 2-page solicitation. I don't have to open up a 50 or 100-page federal solicitation to show you what I mean by here are the prompts you need to respond to. Here's where the funder talks about what they're looking for. This is a really easy 2-pager. So I'm going to go a little bit through this so we can provide context to what I just said. The J. Sargent Reynolds Community College Educational Foundation Program, talking about the Teaching Innovation Fund, to assist faculty in the testing of ideas to deliver inclusive teaching strategies that foster a sense of belonging. That right there tells you what the funder is looking for. So if you're a faculty member and you've got an idea, you want to say, does my idea involve delivering inclusive teaching strategies? And is one of the goals of the delivery of those inclusive teaching strategies to foster a sense of belonging that will ultimately drive equitable student outcomes, and hopefully we're talking about increasing equitable student outcomes. If so, then you've probably got a good fit here. If not, you probably don't want to go any further. Okay? Grants may vary with average awards of $1,000 to $2,500. That's your award ceiling and your award floor. $1,000 to $2,500 would be your standard budget. You don't want to go over that. And you probably don't want to go under it either. You want to stay right there in the sweet spot. Full-time and adjunct faculty are encouraged to submit project ideas for consideration. There's your eligible applicant. 2 faculty members may partner on a project, including interdisciplinary teams. Individual faculty members may be awarded more than 1 grant if in collaboration with other faculty members. So that tells you that if you work with other faculty members, you can submit more than 1 application. And the fact that they even point this out in the RFP or in the solicitation means they're encouraging you to do that. They're encouraging cross-departmental collaboration. Applications will be reviewed and awarded by members of the Teaching Innovation Fund Selection Committee, comprised of foundation board members, a Reynolds student, a retired faculty member, and other community members by invitation. That just tells you who's going to be reviewing the proposals. Successful applications will be selected based on ideas that explore innovative teaching strategies. Again, this is telling you what they expect to see as you respond to the prompts, as you respond to the questions, that foster equity and a sense of belonging for all students and thus reflect the purpose of the fund. Faculty receiving funding will submit a brief report at the end of the semester. So that tells you if you're awarded, you get into that post-award phase, that 3rd phase of the grant life cycle. This tells you what's going to be required with regard to reporting. If you submit an application, you're agreeing to submit these reports. Faculty receiving funding will submit a brief report at the end of the semester and may be invited to share their project findings at faculty events and or the foundation board. Grant awardees who cannot use the award should notify the foundation office. Unused award funding will be put back in the Teaching Innovation Fund account and used for future awards. This is important, but I can tell you that if you do that, your chances of being awarded in future cycles are probably decrease. Now, I don't work for the foundation. I don't represent this community in any way, shape, or form, but I can tell you that if you apply for funding to a funder, they accept your proposal, they award you the funds, and you don't spend those award funds, and you don't implement the activity. In essence, you say, site, just kidding, we don't want the award money, we can't implement this. It's going to affect your ability to raise funds through that funder in the future. So all that is to say, if you submit an application, you should be serious about it. And if you're awarded funding, you have confidence that you can implement the activity or the idea that you're proposing. Faculty stipends and funding for conference attendance are not eligible project expenses. So here's where they talk about what's allowable and what's not allowable. You don't want to submit an application and have a faculty stipend or conference attendance in the budget. Funding is not intended to supplant other college sources. Supplanting meaning you're asking for money to implement a project that already has funding. It's already being funded by the institution or by another grant. So we want new project ideas, not supplanting our current. And then here's the timeline for proposals. This is the one you really want to look out for. Submission proposal deadline is April 1st. So if you're thinking about submitting an application, today's the 5th. You've got a good amount of time, especially for the level of writing that's required for this. You've got a good amount of time to really flesh out your ideas, put it into the application and submit it. This is great. This tells you when the proposals will be reviewed. Most grants have this in the solicitation. They're called intergovernmental review or non-federal review. It'll tell you when your proposal is going to be reviewed because that helps you then gauge when you can expect an award notification, which is also the starting date of your project. Grant award notifications will be released on May 15th, so that's when you can expect to hear whether or not your project was approved for funding, and then this tells you when the reports are due. Okay, so now we're at the prompts. We're at the questions. And so Teaching Innovation Fund application questions. These are the questions that the selection committee is asking you to respond to. So let me give you a quick hint because the application itself is in a survey, like a Google survey tool, I believe. It's in some kind of a survey tool. I don't know if you can start an application and save. I don't believe you can. So my first hint, well, not my first hint, but another hint I have for you is to take this portion of this RFP, the solicitation, and put it into a Word doc so that you can type your response to each question. You can then make sure you can make sure that you stay at that 200 word count. So see, I've got 3 words out of 128 words, right? And it just helps you flesh out your ideas. And then once you get this template filled out, you can copy paste into that survey tool. You don't need to go back to it. Just for ease, I'm going to make this template available to you. It'll be in the same place. I'll lean on you to tell everyone where they can find this. My PowerPoint presentation will be there. The recording of this will be there. This will be there. The grant matrix will be there. Anything I've shared with you today will all be at that location. Feel free to use this. You don't have to recreate this. I set this up for you. But that's my first. That's another big hint is to use this. Respond to those prompts. So in 200 words or less, state the problem you are trying to address with your project. Most grants start with a need statement. This is your need statement. So maybe in your classroom you've observed that. And keep in mind, this is an equity-focused proposal. You've observed that African American males and Hispanic females are having a more difficult time than their peers grasping specific concepts. Maybe your failure rate is higher among this demography of students as opposed to others. Whatever it is that you're observing in your classroom, again, through the equity lens, you want to state here. That's your need statement. I've identified a problem. Here's the problem. You want to be specific about the inequities of that problem in your classroom. And again, this is African American males are scoring lower than this demography of students. Hispanic females are scoring lower than this demography of students. You really want to flesh that out. You want to talk about your total student population, and you want to use data. Now, sometimes course level data is hard to get here. I encourage you to use the dashboards. You can look at, maybe you don't have course level data, but you can go into the dashboards and look at section level data. And chances are your section level data will correspond in some way, shape, or form to some of the things you're observing in your classroom. Hopefully it's tied to your idea that you want to fund. At any rate, you want to state your need. You want to make sure it's inclusive to how certain demographies of students are performing in your classroom. You want to make sure you back that up with data and use dashboards. Use any of our data tools as much as you can. So you want to make sure that you answer each one of those. You respond to each one of those concisely. It's 200 words or less. So this is not a book. That's 2 to 3 paragraphs at most. Then the next prompt, 200 words or less, what is the idea you want to test to foster a sense of belonging in your classroom? Specifically, you've stated that this is a need. What is your idea to fill that gap? Or what's your idea that will tend to that need? That will take that challenge and improve, make an improvement. So if it's this demography of students is scoring lower on a test, your theory, your hypothesis is that if I implement this idea, those scores will rise. You'll want to really flesh that out, and don't forget that sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is a big piece of this question. How does this align with the college's teaching and learning strategic priorities? Go to the strategic priority, go to the strategic direction on the website if you don't know, but you'll want to look at focus area 1, focus area 2. Those are the 2 big teaching and learning focus areas. Just talk about how your idea aligns with those 2 focus areas. What is the expected outcome? What are you expecting to happen by implementing this activity, this intervention? Draw it back to your needs statement. I expect by implementing X, Y, and Z that this demography of students that are scoring lower than their peers will start scoring higher. And here's why. I like to if I'm recommending something, I want to back it up with some research. By research, I mean a case study that tells me if I do this, statistically, I'm more likely to see the positive benefits. So if you think back to our student success plan, that entire plan is anchored on research from the CCRC, Achieving the Dream. There's What Works Clearinghouse in there. Those are all research case studies that validate our project design. Another institution implemented that exact activity or similar activity and saw the results they expected. So then we are more likely to see the results we expect by implementing that same activity. So I like to align it just a little bit with case studies. You can find that, put it in there, that's important. And then total project budget, so what are you going to spend your money on? Thinking about that $1,000 to $2,500 budget range. And then you'll want to itemize it, which means, if you're going to spend $1,000, what are you spending it on? Maybe you want to buy hands-on instructional kits. Maybe you want to buy 2 and they're $500 a pop. So you want to put that on an itemized budget. So again, I offer this template to any of you. It'll be, you will have access to it. And that's really it for the Teaching and Innovation Fund solicitation. Again, this is a really simple solicitation to start applying some of these concepts. I'm going to go back to a slideshow and just wrap this up. Okay, so tips for better grant writing. This is sort of my summary, my overview. Provide a concise and thorough needs assessment. All grants start with some kind of a needs assessment. I've identified a need, and I've got an idea that will improve that need. Because we need funding is not an acceptable need state. Instead, clearly describe the need that your project will meet and how it will make a significant impact for good. This is a big one. Differentiate your institution. Concisely describe how your work sets you apart from other applicants. A lot of times you can do this very subtly through data. So we know that Reynolds has, I'll say impressive, but there's not another community college that has data infrastructure. That is a strategic advantage that we need to take advantage of in the grants group. So having access to institutional data, we also have access to Lightcast analysts, so we have labor market information. We can put together a fairly compelling argument just with those 2 things alone. Another thing that will set us apart from other institutions or from other applicants is making sure that whatever we are recommending, whatever we're proposing, the activities we're proposing to implement, the interventions we're proposing to implement, we have case studies that validate those ideas. That will set us apart from other applicants. You'd be shocked at how many institutions have these great ideas, but they don't look for validation as to whether or not those interventions will actually work. whether those interventions will actually do what we think they're going to do. So data, like using data is a way of differentiating your institution from other institutions. Be thoughtful when using industry jargon. This is a big one. A lot of times we get into alphabet soup when it comes to acronyms. You want to be very careful. Know that non-federal reviewers are not subject matter experts in every field. Some of them are faculty members. Some of them work in a grants office. It's really a wide swath of individuals who review these grants. So you want to keep it as simple and understandable as possible. And if you use acronyms, you want to make sure the first time you use that acronym, you actually spell it out, and then you put the acronym in parentheses, and then you can use the acronym throughout the rest. Sometimes we get so weighted in data and case studies to validate our project design that we forget that there's a story there. Reviewers appreciate a compelling story, and so you always want to remember the story. This is particularly difficult for seasoned grant writers because they write, for me, I never write first person. A lot of times I get very wordy, and writing concisely is difficult for me. But also, making sure that the storyline is front and center can be a challenge. A lot of times I'll just free write and I'll put all the stuff in there, and then I'll go back and I'll write to be concise, and I'll really look for how I weave the storyline through to really make sure I'm connecting all of these activities in a cohesive story that ultimately demonstrates that whatever it is I'm proposing will create the impact that we are hoping it will create, whether, again, for most of the grants we write, it's increased student outcomes, but there might be an economic development impact, there might be a community vibrancy impact, something like that. But at any point, you want to remember to tell your story. Write with balance, make sure you're presenting a need statement that aligns with your solution. So if you have a need statement, but your activities don't address that need, then you're not writing a balanced argument. Also within the writing with balance is making sure that you align your budget with your activities and your solutions. Many grant writers will start with a budget. I talked about this earlier. Start with a budget. How do I want to spend these funds? And then let that inform your activities and your timeline. Make sure you review your draft next to the solicitation. So if I'm writing an application for the Teaching and Innovation Fund, I'm going to take that Word template. Thankfully, I've got the question on the template. But if I don't, I'm going to keep that solicitation right next to me. And as I respond to the prompts, I'm going to go back and ask myself, did I adequately respond to that prompt? Did I answer the question that they are asking me in the application? Recruit an objective reviewer to also review your proposal with the solicitation. Sometimes as we write, we come up with these creative ways of responding to those prompts. Having an objective reviewer there can help keep us honest. Double check your budget math. I always start with an Excel spreadsheet. I create the budget on Excel, then I can just transfer it over to my Word doc or federal form or a budget form that I'm using for this. I say that because I can check my equations on Excel and then I can transfer. But even after I transfer it over to a federal form or to a Word doc, I want to double check my math. There are a lot of budgets that get reviewed. The math doesn't line up. Maybe you're putting a budget in the application, but you also have to put that budget on a 424, which is a federal budget form, and the math doesn't align with what's in your application and what's in the 424. All of that just reflects negatively on your institution, and honestly makes the grantor question whether or not you can manage those funds. So you really want to take special care to make sure your budget math works out. There's also all kinds of things that you probably need help with as you formulate the budget. If you've got personnel in the budget, you're going to need to know how we calculate fringe. You're going to need to know how we calculate indirect, if indirect is allowed. You're going to need our federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. These are all things that the grants office manages, and another reason why you should work through the grants office as you put your grants together. Don't procrastinate, start developing projects early. We talked about this. It really is all about proactive grant making. Have I been successful on a last minute grant application? I have, but the vast majority of successful grants that I brought in have been proactive. We've worked on it for months and months and months at a time. So you really want to make sure you're taking a proactive stance. That's it for me. Here's my contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Again, if you're exploring ideas, have a conversation with me. Even if you don't have a grant idea, you've got an idea of something you want to implement in your classroom, and you just don't know where to go. You just need to sit down with somebody and brainstorm. Give me a call, shoot me an email. We'll meet, we'll talk about it. Thank you all again for attending, and hope it's been helpful. And good luck in your grant run.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean, so much for that enlightening presentation. Very valuable information for our faculty and staff interested in seeking funding for their projects. So thank you for your time. Little housekeeping for those that joined us today live. A survey email will be going out about today's session. All of us at CETL, presenters, moderators, and the like, really appreciate your feedback. It helps us provide stellar and outstanding opportunities for you all. So please take a look at that. For those that are watching the recording back, if you want to provide your feedback on this particular session for Sean, for ourselves, and the opportunities, shoot us a note or an email at cetl@reynolds.edu. We'd be happy to provide you with that survey as well. Sean mentioned the recording and all presentation slide decks, documents. Those are going to go on our website under our faculty learning opportunities page. You can find CETL online at go.reynolds.edu/CETL or off the Reynolds homepage under faculty and staff at the top. You'll find us Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. So those will get posted. You can find all that documentation there. And if you can't, at the end of the day, just shoot us an email, cetl@reynolds.edu. Lastly, we have some great other faculty learning opportunities this week. We have a few more HighFlex opportunities for our faculty jump-starting into, I think it's second 7-week sessions, or for those that are just curious about the HighFlex modality, please check those out. And we also have 2 sessions we're co-sponsoring with the libraries on supporting student learning through OER materials. So check those out. Those are Wednesday and I believe Friday. Go over to the website, find registration and stuff. So thank you all again for your time. Thank you, Sean, and we'll see you at the next flow. Thanks, everyone.